June 19th, 2009. A stretch of desert outside Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. Two federal police pickup trucks sit idling on a dirt road with their headlights off. Inside the lead truck, a man sits blindfolded, wrists zip-tied behind his back, a hood pulled tight around his throat. He has been driven for 6 hours. He does not know his name is on a list. He does not know the men in the trucks are not really police. He is going to die in the next 4 minutes, and nobody in the United States government is going to write it down. That scene is not one documented killing. It is a composite, the kind of thing that happened again and again in those years, and it is the world Sicario was built on. Not one man, not one hit, a landscape. By the end of 2010, the Mexican government estimated that more than 34,000 people had been killed in the drug war that began under President Felipe Calderón in December of 2006. Bodies in oil drums, bodies hanging from bridges, bodies with notes pinned to the chest. Ciudad Juarez, right across the river from El Paso, Texas, recorded more than 3,000 murders in 2010 alone. That is, over 8 people a day in one city. That was the real number Denis Villeneuve was staring at when he read Taylor Sheridan's script. This is the story of the true world behind Sicario. The cartel war it borrowed from, the assassins the title is named after, the tunnels, the corrupt cops, the shadow programs the film only hints at. And the reason the movie's most terrifying line is not spoken by a cartel boss, it is spoken by a man wearing an American government badge. But here is what most viewers never realized. The character everyone remembers, Alejandro Gillick, the quiet, soft-spoken assassin played by Benicio del Toro, is not one person. He is a composite of at least 4 real archetypes from the border war. In the film,
I worked in Juarez, from Mexico. I was a prosecutor.
He is a former prosecutor from Juarez who lost his family to the cartels and later worked for the Medellin cartel in Colombia. And each piece of him traces back to someone real. You have to understand the word itself. Sicario. In modern Mexico, it means hitman. But the word is far older. It comes from the Latin Sicarios, daggerman, and the sica, a short curved blade. In the 1st century, the Sicarii were Jewish zealots in Roman Judea who carried those blades hidden under their cloaks. They moved through festival crowds, slipped the blade between the ribs of a collaborator, and vanished before the body hit the ground in the decades before Jerusalem fell in 70 A.D. 2,000 years later, the same word travels through Spain, through Colombia, and lands in the mouths of teenage killers in Medellin working for Pablo Escobar. By the 1990s, Sicario was the standard Colombian street term for a paid assassin, usually young, usually poor, usually disposable. When the Mexican cartels absorbed Colombian methods, they absorbed the word too. Today, in Juarez, in Tijuana, in Culiacan, a Sicario can be an ex-soldier or a 15-year-old with a phone and a pistol. Always cheap, always replaceable. Now think about the film's opening. An FBI team raids a house in a quiet Arizona suburb in Chandler, near Phoenix. They find no hostage. They find dozens of decomposing bodies sealed inside the walls. Kate Macer walks out into the yard, shaking. That horror was not invented. Across Juarez and the surrounding state in those years, narco graves were uncovered again and again, some holding a handful of bodies, some holding dozens. And in Tamaulipas, in August of 2010, a single ranch near San Fernando produced 72 bodies. Migrants executed by the Zetas. Some accounts say they refused to work for the cartel. Others say they simply could not pay. The details vary. The number does not. That is the sensory reality Villeneuve was pulling from. A world where mass graves were counted in dozens and the newspapers ran out of room on the front page. So who are the real Alejandros? Start with the Colombians. In the 1980s, Escobar's Medellin cartel industrialized assassination. He recruited from the hillside slums of Medellin, kids from 12 to 20, and gave them motorcycles, pistols, and a bounty, reportedly thousands of dollars for a police officer, far more for a judge. His most infamous Sicario was John Jairo Velasquez, known as Popeye. Popeye claimed to have personally killed around 300 people and to have coordinated the deaths of roughly 3,000 more. He murdered his own girlfriend on Escobar's order. He served about 23 years, walked out in 2014, became a bizarre YouTube celebrity, and died of cancer in 2020. That is one thread of Alejandro's DNA. The professional who lost everything and kept killing anyway. Now the second thread. The cartel enforcer with military training. In the late 1990s, a group of deserters from the Mexican Army's Special Forces, the GAFE, walked away from their unit and were hired by Gulf Cartel boss Ociel Cardenas Guillen as his bodyguards. They became Los Zetas. These were not street kids. They were trained in counterinsurgency, some of them at the School of the Americas at Fort Benning, Georgia. They knew how to breach a building, how to interrogate, how to make a person disappear. When they broke from the Gulf Cartel around 2010 and became their own organization, they set the modern standard for cartel brutality. Beheadings on video, massacres, mass graves in San Fernando. Alejandro, in the film, moves like a man with that training. Quiet, patient, never a wasted motion. Third thread. The revenge killer. The emotional core of the character. In the film, Alejandro's wife was beheaded, and his daughter thrown into a vat of acid by the cartel boss he is now hunting.
It cut off his wife's head and threw his daughter into a vat of acid.
And here the film reaches for a real memory. Across Chihuahua State in those years, public officials had life expectancies measured in weeks. Prosecutors who investigated cartel crimes were shot on their front lawns. Their families were targeted. The number of Mexican officials and journalists killed between 2006 and 2012 runs into the hundreds. Taylor Sheridan has said he built Alejandro's backstory from the composite grief of those real families, people who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. Fourth thread, the one Sicario handles most carefully, the American intelligence asset. Matt Graver, played by Josh Brolin in flip-flops and cargo shorts, is a CIA officer on special assignment, running an operation that reaches onto Mexican soil, doing things no U.S. officer is legally supposed to do. So he attaches an FBI agent, Kate Macer, to give the mission a domestic legal veneer. Because the CIA is barred from running law enforcement operations inside the United States, and an FBI agent's presence blurs that line. That legal gray zone is not fiction. It is the kind of workaround that has shadowed American agencies along the border for decades. Here's the hook. When the team crosses into Juarez to extract Guillermo Diaz, the brother of a cartel figure they're squeezing, the danger is not fantasy. Between 2008 and 2012, U.S. agencies ran cross-border operations in cooperation with select Mexican federal units, some of which were compromised, some of whose officers worked for a cartel, and the Americans at the same time. The convoys were real. The bridge crossings were real. The moment when the team is stuck in Juarez traffic and realizes the Sicarios could be in the next lane, that fear was the daily reality for agents working the border in those years. And now the scheme. Because Sicario, at its heart, is not about killing a cartel boss. It is about controlling the market. In the film, when Kate demands to know what the mission really is, Graver explains that the goal is not to shut down the drug trade. It is to shake it apart and push it back into the hands of a single, Colombian-run structure the United States can more easily control and predict. Order, not justice. A trade with one boss is a trade with one phone number. And that idea has a real-world echo. By the early 2000s, the Mexican trade had settled into a rough balance between the Sinaloa, Gulf, Juarez, and Tijuana cartels. Then Calderon sent in the army in 2006, Kingpins fell, and the balance shattered into younger, more violent factions. Some analysts began arguing quietly that stability mattered more than justice, and that the cartel most amenable to a quiet arrangement was Sinaloa, run by Joaquin Guzman Loera, El Chapo. This is not just conspiracy talk. Jesus Vicente Zambada Niebla, son of El Chapo's partner Ismael Zambada, was arrested in 2009 and extradited to the United States, and in 2011 his defense team argued in a Chicago court that the DEA had effectively given the Sinaloa cartel a pass in exchange for intelligence on its rivals. The U.S. government denied any formal agreement, but analyses of the period found that the overwhelming majority of major cartel arrests fell on Sinaloa's rivals, not on Sinaloa itself. That is the terrifying idea behind Sicario. Not that the cartels are monsters, that the people fighting them decided at some level that a controllable monster was useful. Now the tunnels. The film's most claustrophobic sequence, the night vision raid through a smuggling tunnel near Nogales, is drawn from documented reality. The first sophisticated cross-border drug tunnel was discovered in May of 1990, running from Agua Prieta, Sonora, to Douglas, Arizona. It was around 270 feet long, concrete-lined, ventilated, and it ended in a house tied to the Guzman organization. Since then, well over 200 cross-border tunnels have been found, most clustered around San Diego and Tijuana. One discovered in 2020 ran more than 4,000 feet and included rail carts, a ventilation system, and electricity. These are not improvised. They are infrastructure, some costing more than $1 million, and the laborers who dug them often did not leave alive. That is the world Kate Macer walks into. The film gives you 30 seconds of dread inside a concrete tube. The real thing goes on for a mile. Here is where the film stops pretending. Its most disturbing scene is not a shootout. It is the story of Silvio, a Sonoran police officer, a husband and father, who moonlights running drug loads because his police salary cannot cover his life. He is not a monster. He is a corrupt cop, and that too is documented reality. In 2009, Juarez purged hundreds of its municipal police on corruption grounds. Federal vetting of Mexican police in that era found that a large share of officers failed trust and drug tests. The problem was not a few bad apples. The problem was that the cartels paid better than the state. A Juarez patrolman might earn a few $100s a month. A cartel could offer him thousands a week to look away, or more to drive a truck through a checkpoint. And the men who said no often did not live long enough to spend the money they turned down. Silvio is not executed at a family dinner. In the film, Alejandro kidnaps him at the tunnel and uses him to reach the cartel, then kills him along the way. The family dinner execution belongs to someone else, the cartel boss himself. And Silvio's wife and son appear only at the very end, which makes his death land even harder. Because Alejandro is not the hero of this film. He is the instrument. And the American government put him in that seat, which brings us to the man Alejandro is hunting. Fausto Alarcón, the film's Sonora cartel boss, a composite clearly inspired by figures like El Chapo Guzman and the Juarez cartel's Vicente Carrillo Fuentes. In the movie's coldest sequence, Alejandro walks into Alarcón's home while the family is at dinner, kills his wife and 2 sons at the table, and then kills Alarcón. It is the private, unspoken end of a personal war, and it echoes something real. Family targeting was standard in those years. When Zetas commander Heriberto Lascano was killed in October of 2012, his body was stolen from a funeral home that same night. When Arturo Beltran Leyva was killed by Mexican Marines in December of 2009, retaliation followed fast. A young sailor who had taken part in the operation was buried in his hometown, and within hours gunmen entered his mother's home and murdered his mother, his aunt, his sister, and his brother. None of them had anything to do with the drug war. They were killed for being related to a man in a uniform. That is the world Sicario refuses to sanitize. Now the money, because none of this exists without it. Estimates put the annual gross revenue of Mexican trafficking organizations somewhere between $19 and $29 billion, most of it laundered back into Mexico through bulk cash and through banks. In 2012, HSBC, one of the largest banks in the world, paid roughly $1.9 billion. Justice Department found it had laundered at least $881 million for the Sinaloa cartel and other groups. Not a rogue branch, systematic for years. And no HSBC executive went to prison. That asymmetry tells you everything. A 20-year-old Sicario in Juarez gets a bullet. A banker gets a fine. Here is the detail that stays with you. Cartel accountants delivered cash to HSBC's Mexico branches in boxes designed to the exact dimensions of the teller's windows. The tellers knew. Deposits were structured to stay under reporting thresholds, then wired to shell companies, then routed and reinvested until the money came out clean, having passed through layer after layer, while someone in a suit signed off at every step. That is why Matt Graver is not really chasing money. He is chasing structure, because the structure is what makes the killing possible. That is Sicario's real subject, not violence, structure. Who benefits? Who decides? Who signs the paperwork that lets the war continue? The film ends with Kate, broken, forced at gunpoint to sign a statement declaring the operation legal. She signs, Alejandro walks away. And in the final shot, a boy plays soccer on a dusty field in a Mexican border town when gunfire cracks in the distance. Everyone freezes. Then the game resumes. Because in that world, violence is not an interruption, it is the weather. That last image is the truest thing in the movie. For the people who actually live in Juarez, in Reynosa, in Nuevo Laredo, gunshots at night became background noise years ago. Children learned to duck. Mothers learned to keep the lights off. The Mexican government estimates that more than 350,000 people have been killed in cartel-related violence since 2006, with over 100,000 more officially missing. Disappeared. Buried in fields nobody has dug up yet. That is not a movie. That is a war fought in silence, in a language of shovels and lime pits, while the rest of the continent scrolls past the headlines. What happened to the people who inspired the film? El Chapo Guzman was recaptured for the last time in January of 2016, extradited to the United States in January of 2017, convicted on multiple counts in February of 2019, and sentenced to life plus 30 years at the Supermax in Florence, Colorado. His partner, Ismael Zambada, the man whose organization the DEA allegedly spared, stayed free until July of 2024, when he was taken into custody after a private plane landed near El Paso, Texas, under circumstances the U.S. government still has not fully explained. The Sinaloa cartel did not collapse. It split, and the violence went on. Mexico has continued to record around 30,000 homicides a year, among the highest levels in its history. The war did not end. It just stopped being new. What Sicario understood, and what most cartel movies never grasp, is that the war on drugs was never only a war on drugs. It was a war on control. Who controls the plazas, the routes, the phone number that decides whether a shipment gets through? And in that war, the American government made choices, uncomfortable ones. Choices that could mean feeding one monster to starve another. Choices that end, in the film, with a family dead at a dinner table and a quiet man walking out into the night. The word Sicario once meant dagger man, a killer hidden in a crowd. 2,000 years later, we have not changed the job description. We have only changed who signs the paycheck. Sometimes it is a cartel. Sometimes it is a state. And sometimes, if the movie is telling the truth, it is both at once. That is the real story behind Sicario. Not a hitman, not a mission, a system, and the system is still running.